Good evening. We are very thrilled to see you this evening for the part 7 of What is Narration? This evening, as you notice, for some of you who come again and again, it is a series that Farida, Youssef, and myself are curating. And we are reaching the 7th part, which means that there is an interest, that we are developing something. And this evening, we are very proud to welcome Ramzi, Makram Ebeid, and Waleed Arafa to talk about human architecture. And I will leave you with them, but please stay tuned to what we are going to do for next year as well. We are going to develop into something new. And yes, and we are really thrilled to have you. And I leave the floor to Farida and you. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and for making the time to think with us and to narrate with us. So, what is narration? To tell you briefly about this series that Brigitte and I have been putting together, is interested in looking at how we reflect back on our experiences and how we turn those into stories. Because our narratives, we always want to communicate them. And somehow when we were thinking about, well, what are the different fields in which that happen, it's almost every field. Every field tries to turn an experience into a story, and architecture does the same. Our buildings, our homes are meant to be read just as we read books. We see in them not just narratives, but traditions and characters. We see stories about places and experiences. And when architects kind of have their own tools and their own ways of bringing them together. So let's say if a story needs a narrator, a building needs an architect. If a story needs a reader, a building needs someone to live in it. And that relationship is what we want to explore today with Ramzi and Waleed. I want to give you a bit of a background about them, and then we can start together our discussion. So Ramzi is the founder of Human Nature. It is a boutique interior furniture and product design firm based in Cairo, known for its emphasis on functionality and inherent minimalism, but we'll see that it goes much beyond that. His high-end firm tries to blend simplicity with intention in each of its projects. And as head designer of this firm, Ramzi delves into these projects with a design philosophy rooted in understanding each client's unique personality and requirements. Before studying at UCLA, Ramzi earned a BA in International Business from George Washington University, and that, I'm sure, gives him a background and a distinct edge, which allows you to seamlessly integrate creative and strategic elements in all your projects. And Waleed Arafa is the founder and principal of Arafa Architecture, established in Cairo in 2006, and he proudly leads a team of young Egyptian architects, although not just Egyptians. We met a new Russian architect in your firm. You graduated with a bachelor's in architecture from Ain Shams University, following by a postgraduate degree in conservation and historical buildings from the AA School in London. And you're also now a researcher in Islamic arts and architecture. And we kind of can't dissociate your interest in Islamic architecture from what you do, because you continuously find ways to connect Islamic architecture to your practice. And it goes without saying that your work has gained global recognition, especially with the Basuna Mosque, and Touchwood with many, many awards, including the Arafa Award for Architecture and the World Architecture Festival. Well, that, inshallah, then the best is yet to come. And so today we kind of want to unpack how it is that your buildings and your designs, or your interest and your approach to all of those, places you not just as architects, but also as storytellers. And maybe we can start with that. What is it that about buildings that sort of makes them narrators of history? Maybe to unpack that, we can first talk about the etymology itself of the word architecture in Greek, which goes back to arche, which means a principle. And both of you always kind of work, or any architect works from like a design principle. But that gets kind of, it's a bit like if we compare it to narration, or if you compare it to the realm of storytelling, it's like a plot. You have something that you're playing around with that you need to think about consistently in order to tell that story about that design, to bring that principle into something to bring it to life. But in both of your practices, you attach that principle to both history and tradition. And I was wondering, how is it that you seek the past itself as your design principle in both of your practices?
What do we get?
For me, the context is always very important, obviously, and that's one of the most important things I felt that I learned in design school. And so, as an Egyptian, I think we have to look at our Egyptian surroundings. And so, with every project, I always try to bring in Egypt at some layer, either through the building, or through the area itself, or through the history of the family, or the history of the brand. So that's always very interesting. So it doesn't have to be a very. I think some people take it a bit too real. They just copy it without any inspiration. They take it too literally. Sorry, they take it very literally, and I think that's where sometimes the problem arises, because today's function is different than yesterday's. It's different than 200 years ago. So you kind of have to reinterpret your inspirations to make it, work for today's needs and desires for your clients. So that always comes, I think, mostly through a lot of research about either the brand or the person and the building itself. And I personally prefer working in older spaces that has that already.
I've noticed actually in a lot of your projects you always connect the inside to the outside. So even though you might work constantly as an interior designer on the inside, but we cannot dissociate it from like a design element that you might take from a building, and it could be something very simple, or it could be even a memory. Yes. And then you make that into the design principle in a way, like it becomes the plot line.
Look, I grew up with a dad who would always take us around and talk to us about buildings and architecture and art and culture, and so I thanks to him, I developed this love for it since I was a kid. I didn't study architecture. I didn't have the brains for it, like Waleed does. But I always take it as an inspiration, because it's one of my biggest passions. But that's why that's how we met. Actually, I saw the Basuna Mosque. I was like, oh my God, who is this?
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, and before that,
We met again.
I was like, okay.
So your question was the past.
Yes, exactly.
Our lives are very short. Even if we live, say, 100 years, I don't think it's a very smart thing to learn. To reinvent the wheel within that relatively very short period. And especially, not just, I'm a proud Egyptian, but this is not just about Egyptians, but especially when you're Egyptian and you have thousands of years of mistakes and successful lessons, how can you skip that? You simply need to go and look back at everything and learn from it to go forward. So I don't live in the past. I learn from the past for the future. That's what I try to do. And I think that's it's your memory. Imagine if you wake up one day and everything that you've learned is not there. How can you add something new? So that's what the past means for me.
It's something that's very poetic, because it's almost as if when you inhabit a space, you also inhabit its past. So if I go into a space design using the principles, say, of old Islamic houses in Islamic Cairo, say that was replicated somewhere else, I might also be kind of inhabiting its poetics, taking on something from it.
Not every replica can do that. If there are similarities that necessitate this replication, I don't believe in 100% replication,
We can't, because you need to make it contemporary to the present.
But even as a process, even if something looks like it's a replica, it has to be, for me, it has to happen accidentally or as a result, not as a goal. I don't want to go and replicate something. I always try and discern between what is immutable in the past, something that will never change, which is usually very, very few things. They're all about principles, not about manifestations or embodiments. Then manifestations and embodiment have to change because time, space, people, and conditions vary, and then the results or the embodiments have to vary. And that's how a genuine continuation of the past can happen, in my opinion, not just a nostalgic, replica or copying, because then we'd stop and it never happened. And when you think about all of our history of architecture, for instance, who replicated who before? I mean, even the idea of style or whatever is all in retrospect. There are certain conditions and circumstances that produced a certain type of approach to design and architecture or fashion or what have you. And then after a while, we come back and say, oh, Ebeid or ancient Egyptian or and so on.
So there's another etymology to the word architecture in Arabic, and that's imara. And imara brings us into a completely different context, because the word itself makes us think of the architect not as, definitely as a builder, but also as someone who is going to be of service to other people. Their role is to kind of is to generate wealth in the sense of generate wealth in the sense of that you're sharing it with other people as well, and that means that the building has a different relationship or is always in relation to the people. And that makes me think about the importance of the word local that the both of you attach to your practice. And this is what stemmed our thinking about our encounter today, and specifically the episode that you were putting together. So I was wondering, maybe we could introduce the audience to Bathuna, which is a mosque designed by Waleed, through an episode actually designed by Ramzi. So we'll see a little bit of it and then try to understand and unpack this question of the local and the ma'mari as a service, as someone of service. So it's a very short clip from a wonderful episode.
Hundreds of kilometers away from Cairo, between the small cities of Asyut and Sohag, lies a small Nile-adjacent town called Bathuna. Most Egyptians haven't heard of Bathuna, so to see a new mosque with an extremely high design caliber being built there was, to put it lightly, a surprise. I had casually met its architect Waleed Arafa before, but had no idea this humble man was this talented.
Okay, there's something technical happening and I don't
Photos
understand
of the
it.
mosque, I wanted to know him more. I messaged him, congratulated him. He called me a brilliant designer. I loved him more. We met. He invited me to experience the mosque firsthand in Bathuna, and bada bing, bada boom, 5 years later, I made it. The town was super welcoming to us, with some residents even inviting us to their homes so we can take in the beauty of the mosque from different angles, including this rooftop. Up there, Waleed shared with us how a general proportional system for a design is crucial and can create not only intentional, but also unintentional beauty.
But then this is what we call experience, because you do the harmonic thing, okay, or you work in a consistent manner, and then even the things that you didn't imagine that you see afterwards, okay, become something that you can intend later on.
Yes.
Okay, so that's one of the very rewarding moments, especially when it's discovered by someone else.
Yes.
Not by yourself.
Another important rule of design is respecting the area the space is located in some manner.
Even the actual, every single block is made with love. It's a simple material, and this is a 300 years old building.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to note that Ramzi and Waleed are also wearing black as they are in the film. It's almost like we're recreating it for everyone. So it's almost as if the local becomes like a design principle. Not just as we can see here in the Bathuna Mosque, but generally in your approach to design. And when we talk of the local, we talk of the people that it's made for. How do you actually make a building or a design local? Maybe in the experience of the Bathuna Mosque, or going back to one of the projects that Ramzi you did. I think you worked as well with the Youssef previous building. How do you think of the users of this building, not just as users, but actually as future collaborators, or as collaborators in the design itself?
No, she's asking you.
Well, for the Wisa Wasif building, that was a very small scale budget, and he's such a phenomenal architect in our history that I definitely didn't want to take the eye away from his work. So it was more about showcasing his work than anything else on a very small budget. So everything that we added to the space was rather minimal. And in the areas where we thought that it needed a bit more character, we just played around with colors. But the main focal thing was his architecture. Was every single space in that villa was full of beautiful details, including amazing gypsum glass stained windows. So we would take colors from that and incorporate it in the furniture, just so people see the colors a bit more. When we had like his private office, the windows were beautiful, and there's like mashabayas. Like I made all the furniture inside very simple and very modern, just so and blending in color wise, so that way the windows are the ones that stick out. So sometimes your job is just to be quiet and to provide the function and let the beautiful architecture speak for itself. So when you work in a beautiful space like that as an interior designer, that's the easiest job. And I think any interior designer would agree that if you get this beautiful old villa or something, it's asal شغلانة.
But it can be difficult because, again, going back to the ma'amari as someone being of service,
Yeah.
your service then is kind of to be quiet. And
Yes.
that's not easy as well.
It's because it's you have to honor the architect, you have to honor the person or the brand that's going to be using that space. So like and a lot of times design is just you're as interiors, not as architects. You're the backdrop to stuff. So it's important to see it, I think, from that perspective, that you're not supposed to be the star. A lot of times, sometimes the design is supposed to be the star from interiors, but it's like either it's the people that are using it, or the products that they're selling, or what may be. But it's you're creating space for something.
What about Basuna?
In principle, first, the word local to me means being contextual, because, what if I'm working outside of Egypt? It's the contextuality is about acknowledging the diverse conditions that this world is based on. So there's no point in doing, for instance, France in Egypt, or Egypt in Russia, and so on. Each place has its very unique properties, and there are things, of course, in common. And then this contextuality or locality is a celebration of that. And also because a wider, more holistic look requires that one who's really looking closely into their very local context can bring answers that no other place can bring to the wider spectrum. So that's for one. And in Basuna particularly, it was actually scary, because I had so much going on in my mind. I was doing a thesis at the time about mosques in Britain, and my problem with them, in my conclusion, was that they're not British enough, and they should be British. And so here I was faced, just as I was almost done with the thesis, this project came, and I go all the way to Basuna, which is 500 kilometers south of Cairo. It's part of Sohag. And the people there say, do us a mosque like the ones in London. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. You have Abydos here, you have the red monastery, the white monastery. This is the cradle of civilization, literally. And then I take them, it wasn't in the film, she showed you just a snippet, but in the film, the documentary, you see the 300-year-old house, but there's a detail that didn't show in the snippet. We showed where there's a very beautiful detail for turning corners between roads, and it has everything that architecture means. And they don't. So I took all of the crowd, the people, and I said, look at this. They say, what's there? It's the old house of the mayor. I said, this has such and such. I started explaining the principles, and I said, imagine if the builder of this still lived through the 300 years of changes ever since he built it, and understood all the technology that we have now, the economic situation. everything and dealt with this new plot, what would he do? This is what I'm interested in doing, and this is your legacy, and we need to take it further to today and tomorrow.
Which is a bit what you were saying at the complete beginning, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, we just need to adapt.
Exactly. Understand the essence and project it on or mix it with the new realities, and then you'll get something that is suitable for its time, but that doesn't disassociate itself or doesn't go into self-inflicted amnesia. Like I don't want to look at. I'm going to do like London. What? I mean, it's completely irrelevant. And some of them actually took my proposal as, okay, he's going to do us a very bad mosque, not like the ones in London. But then is eventually through the process of the project, I think they understood that what they have is really a treasure that is it's different than any other treasure anywhere else. And that's I think that answers your questions.
Yeah. But there's
There's also a lot of logic into all of this. So we look at our predecessors, and there's a reason why we had courtyards. There's a reason why we used certain materials. There's a reason why we had mashrabiyas. It's about your weather. It's about your environment. It's about your culture.
local again, the local.
It's just that's local, exactly. Yeah. And so it's just some of the stuff is just very simple and logical, and it's just like what Waleed is saying. It's you can't take, and you see this quite frequently around the world when somebody just takes something and they just plop in another country, and it just doesn't work. Because it's a different culture, and it's a different material, it's different weather, it's different.
There's actually a word that was mentioned in the short clip, harmony.
Yeah.
Like the local becomes synonymous with harmony. Like the more local a building is, the more harmonious the experience is going to feel. Like you're not going to feel dissonance when you see it or when you go inside of it. And how do people feel about the Basuna Mosque?
You tell me. I mean, you mean the people over there?
Yeah.
No, they're
yeah.
absolutely. Most of them, at least, are happy and proud, and they feel like. I was told by a few people that they didn't know what they have. So this was one tool of awakening a society or a community to the beauty that they have, because I don't believe that there's any place on earth that doesn't have a treasure of sorts. But then, of course, we go through moments of decline and so on. And our job is to actually awaken that or bring that or emphasize that. And so other things can happen. I'm waiting, actually. I don't consider that enough time elapsed since 2018 for me to really see the fruits that I would like to see out of something like this. Let's wait for maybe a generation or two and see what happens. I hope so.
No, he also changed the community. I mean, I think he added the women's section in the mosque, and the women's section in the mosque was the first time that the daily lives of people in Basuna changed thanks to Waleed.
I mean, in a way, buildings are starting points for new experiences, because when we go inside of a building, our bodies and our habit, we might gain new habits. Like you said, right now there's a women's section. So right now more women are going to be encouraged to go and visit a site that a generation ago maybe they wouldn't have had access to.
They're the biggest group of users, by the way, now.
Wow.
There was a lot of opposition from the older gentlemen in the community, but because the patron is an Azhari scholar from the village, Sam al-Azhari, who's now, funny enough, the minister of endowments, he's the one who really supported that, and he said, because he was financing it, and he said there's nothing in the religion that says that there shouldn't be. And the younger generation, like 45 years and younger, men and women were all for it. And now it's more populated by women. Like there's a lower ground floor in the building that has two entrances. And I made it a universal plan where, like the partition can move, so we can accommodate, if the men are more, then we can move the partition to accommodate more men, and vice versa. It's 100% ladies, in addition to the exclusive part of the ladies.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this building now is kind of adding a new experience, and maybe this intrinsic relationship between architecture and experience kind of ushers in or can help us understand how does design participate in storytellings? Because buildings are made not just to mark history or not just to borrow from the past, but there's also something particular about the way that building is going to narrate its story and how it's going to communicate something with us and to us through our bodies, and that's like the experience that we have. And I'm sure in your design principles, sometimes you think in terms of the senses. Like, I might want someone to smell something different when they're in this area, or to maybe even taste something. Like there was a draftsman in the 15th century who would talk about literally licking the stone to know how it's going to absorb the moisture. And that was in at the height of the Renaissance. So clearly, architecture is a very sensory experience. How difficult sometimes it is for you to go from a drawing, which can be very conceptual, to that understanding that someone is actually going to live there and live there with their senses. How do you dissociate? How do you resist the urge to just stick to the drawing?
I think with each one of us is different. I like starting off and just being very dreamy and free and like having no budget in mind and no constraints and nothing at all. And then that's my first phase of brainstorming. And then I have to get paid, so I have to get I have to become realistic. So then I figure out like, okay, this is going to be over budget, or this is going to be this problem, and then I take the more serious realistic route afterwards. But that's my own process, and I think everybody has their own way.
I try to again collect all of the information that there is, and of course we're talking about users at the end of the day, because it is sensory. I mean, the senses, the five senses are the gate to something beyond that, because it's an experience, it's a spatial experience. A door that is high enough to allow, say, 2 meters is enough for a person to walk through a door, but it might not be comfortable, And
for me, it would be.
All right, you got me there. So anyhow, but I mean in relation, but actually that can open a huge subject, because we're always talking about the geometrical mind. So versus the mathematical, I said 2 meters, but I should have said twice the height of a person, for instance, which is more the ancient mind, by the way. That's why the Japanese have their own proportion system. The Scandinavians, you see the difference in the height, and it's always relevant to their body measurements. So that's a good point. So I was saying, you collect I collect all of this information, and then I start classifying it into things that I cannot change whatsoever. They're facts of life. I have to deal with that, and things that have a certain not elasticity, the flexibility to them. And then you reach a certain hierarchy because perfection cannot be attained. You need to know when things are going to go against each other. Like if you can get everything up to scratch together, then that's fantastic. But if you can't, you have to know what is the hierarchy by which. So what is the most important thing if two things get into a conflict? Because again, design solutions are infinite. So the biggest problem about design, whether interior design, architecture, the design of anything, is to go from an infinite number of solutions to
what
just
you really
one.
need. Yeah.
Okay, and so you have to create or discover a lot of filters by which you can distill the optimum solution, so to speak.
Which is again
there is
why
no one optimum solution, but there's an optimum solution that has to do with the group of factors and people involved in time and space again and conditions
and the
all of
local
that.
and that brings us back to the etymology or the origin of the word architecture is the principle, because again it's the principles goes it's like a colander. It's going to help you filter exactly what you need from what you don't need.
It's interesting that you brought this up, because I just went through an exercise. It's a project called Architectural Translated. 20 people from around the world were asked to write their understanding of architecture in their own language, their mother tongue. I was asked to do this in English, in Arabic, and then translate it into English and French if I could. I can't. And the etymology, because also we were asked to write a translator's note. So architecture from the Greek, but versus amara in Arabic, which again touches upon the physical and the metaphysical simultaneously. It's one and the same. So and then the implications of the practice based on this understanding and the other understanding. They're not quite the same, by the way.
Not at all. They would generate two very different worldviews.
Yeah.
I mean, in one, the local becomes kind of like way up at in your like checklist, and then in the other, it might not be there necessarily.
Right.
But speaking of the metaphysical, I remember Gamal al-Ghitani, an Egyptian novelist in the 20th century, said something very interesting about the entrances of monumental mosques in Cairo, like Sultan Hassan or Sultan Bar'u fi Shara al-Mu'izz. He said that as you enter into the dark, very, very dark vestibule, you go into a long and narrow corridor that is usually very dark, and then suddenly you go into the courtyard and it becomes light and very enlightened. And he said that it was almost the experience of birth. Like you are in a womb, then there's the experience of the birth itself, and then suddenly you go into life, where you are alive. Can these rich experiences brought by architecture and design, in your opinion, allow us to expand our relationship to the world? Like, is it possible that maybe a good building might propel someone to live something differently, or to see, or to expand their views on their neighborhood?
For sure.
And can we talk about architecture through feelings, not just through right or wrong, good or bad? Can we think of feelings as ways for us to critique buildings today?
Yeah,
Especially with
there's always
Cairo.
objective ways to judge anything, but there's also you can also be very subjective and say, I feel very calm when I go to Ibn Tulun as a Catholic. I always feel super like spiritually elevated inside there, and Basuna Mosque as well, because they designed it with a journey in mind. And so when you go into the womb and you go into birth, it kind of gives you the moment to transit from the outside into the holy space you're going to inside. Because our world out here is just crazy. So when you want to go and you worship in a church or a mosque or whatever, you have to kind of quiet down and connect. And so, like, at least with places of worship, designers and architects, that's a huge responsibility. Is that they're building something where somebody's connecting with a higher power. So that's the most important, I think, in design, is that this is a huge responsibility. You do change lives, and architecture has changed lives throughout.
You need that when you're working on homes too, because home is supposed to be the place where I feel the safest.
Yes.
So
So when you're working at homes, like it's different in that, like, each person is unique, obviously. So like you spent a lot of time with your clients, and like in مثلا I did Diwan في Guna and Maadi, and I worked a lot with Nihal and Amal, and like I went out to eat with them and went and had long discussions and discussed books, and really got to understand the multifaceted, layered people that they are, to make that reflective and the design itself. So you really have to know the person and see what's going to make them comfortable, what's going to make them efficient, what's going to make them happy, what's going to make them calm. And that has proven to me in the last 18, 20 years that each client of mine has always been different. And that's one reason I love my job. But there's a constant discovery. You're always learning something new.
So it's literally human architecture.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, that's like, I mean, the name
The
Human
name of your
Nature.
firm,
Yeah,
exactly.
so that happened by chance, but it worked out. I was like listening to Madonna, honestly, and then like, and Madonna kept on saying it's human nature. I'm like, Ishta Madonna, and Samir Sharka, human nature.
I totally agree, because actually this could be a definition for architecture, because if architecture doesn't have that, it ceases to be architecture. It just becomes a construction of sorts.
Which is a bit like Cairo today, in some places of Cairo.
That's a thorny one. I mean, there's a lot of buildings in Cairo that are like that, but I believe in the power of the city. It's so strong that despite of all of what's happening, it's still standing as a, absolutely. But I wanted to allude to a balance between two things. Like, for instance, if we think of the Sagrada Familia by Gaudi, which
Barcelona.
I think, and then, So I mean, a balance between two concepts. When an architect manages, or like good architecture manages to write part of the narrative, and then allow every person. So like you mentioned Ghitani and talking about the experience of birth and so on. So that's his interpretation. Someone else might find it scary. Someone else might find it different things. So obviously, again, I agree with Ramzi. There are objective things, but there should be a lot of room for interpretation and subjectivity, and that all contributes to the richness of a building. But also sometimes, that's why I mentioned Gaudi and Sagrada Familia. I always found it fascinating that someone who passed away a long time ago, like, I mean, in our experience as architects today, you could be alive and kicking and literally kicking, but the client's taking the project somewhere else, and you're there, your drawings are there, and they don't care. Whereas in the Sagrada Familia, for instance, he passed away a long time ago. The project is still ongoing, and the intent he has embedded in the place has both that balance between allowing so many other artists that he's never met in their life, they've never met him, to add to the building layers and layers of meaning and of beauty without negating his original intent. That balance
very interesting.
is very amazing to me. And I think that's, again, one of the things that could define what architecture is or should be.
I mean, it's a building that literally lends itself to experience and lends itself to others. Like it's maybe this is the building that brings together both etymologies then, because it is a building that has generated ideas and experiences. So it's a sense of an imaro.
Incredibly so.
But it's also a building that, you know, we can't take any of the principles, like the design principles are all there in that case. Moving on maybe a little bit to this idea of a human architecture, and I want to push it a little bit further with you guys, since it's also the title of our session. Architecture is particularly significant because we build the buildings to which we're going to belong. It could be the office, it could be a home, it could be the museum that I'm going to go to, but it's going to shape, they're going to shape us. And in literature, architecture is sometimes used as a trope, whereas an author might, rather than describe a person, they're just going to talk about the place where they belong. You know, it could be like a description of my office, could be telling you something about, you know, something that I'm going through. And they mirror their inhabitants, and Naguib Mahfouz did this spectacularly, for instance, in the trilogy, where the architecture stands for the human. How aware are you of that relationship in your work? So how do you make your designs not just livable, but also humane? Like, and maybe that also comes in your relationships with your clients.
That's like, this goes down again to functionality and how they live their life and what they need and basic heights and stuff. You can, like, if you're doing a kitchen or a bathroom for somebody, you're like, how high do you want your sink? How low do you want it? So, like, and you're doing the kitchen, like, where do you want the fridge? Where do you want how do you cook? Do you take it from the fridge to the counter to the sink, or like, what's your process? So, like, you really have to spend a lot of time with the client to know, like, their entire day and how they work, and that's from a home to an office. And then you discover, like, if you go to their current space, what works, what doesn't work, and just like Waleed said several times, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So if I go into a house and, like, they're very happy with the kitchen, they just don't like the way it looks, then we keep the same format, but we just freshen it up on a visual level. So sometimes you go in, you're like, okay, the reason that you're not happy is because your house isn't allowing you to do your daily routine in an easy way. So and so, like, that's functionality is sometimes missing because people are more concerned with المكان شكله ايه والناس يقولوا ايه لما يشوفوا المكان, which is a كارثة. So, like, I think if you base it on functionality and ground it in the local, wherever it is,
then we always go back to the local.
Yeah, then you're gonna have a successful project, in my humble opinion.
I think it's. I mean, there's always a difference between what people say they want and what they actually need, and that's and in that sense we could be considered. I don't know what to call that. I need to be very sensitive, but I mean, you need to help our own journey in life. We're discovering ourselves through helping people discover themselves as well. And so, but you need to listen very carefully and very critically. Like, I mean, just the example of the Basuna people, they wanted like 100 meters high minaret and a London mosque, and but when I listened carefully, I found that they want to feel. I'm Upper Egyptian, by the way. Upper Egyptians are very tribalistic, very proud people, so they want their mosque to be a source of pride against, say, maybe the other their competitors from other families and tribes. That's what they're really saying when they're saying London. They don't know what a London mosque looks like. So you need to dissect through this, and of course, you don't always succumb to the needs. I'm not a proponent of doing what a client wants unless it's in sync with my ethical code. If it works and if there's no harm in doing that, then we do it.
We're also psychologists, for sure.
I wanted to avoid.
You want to use that word? Use that word. That was for psychologists, and not in a bad way, but you have to kind of like.
Yeah, you feel something.
Yeah, I mean, like, and it's not
You
to
have to
sound.
read between the lines.
You have to read between the lines, but I mean, like, you also, like, through experience, you see the difference between working with a client who knows themselves, or at least is trying to know themselves, and a client who's completely unaware and is like saying stuff like, I want to look like London, like, and so, like, when you have a client like that, you have to, like, dig.
How many divorces happened through?
That alhamdulillah,
That's something, by the way.
That's a strong zero.
Architects can give you. Yeah?
You live through their lives in a way.
Because they start discovering things. They don't know one another. For instance, what brought me this person? It's a project that can bring people together and work.
Architecture is an experience. It generates experiences. Well, one last question before then we leave it to the audience. You mentioned something about ethics, and I think personally that architecture is a field that is very value driven. So design exists in a larger urban space, and a good design and a good building is committed not just to its own aesthetics, but to the community that it's going to serve. And today with the climate emergency, that's something that we cannot deny, since sustainability probably plays an even bigger role in the choice of your materials. There's more some circumspection about the purpose and the resources that you're going to be using. And so what is the role of preservation in your practice? How do you also think about about the future? We started with talking about the past, but there's definitely also a question about the future. And and what challenges do you see in regards to that? Keeping in mind that you still want to do something that is local and that serves the future.
Well, I think that we're definitely in a design renaissance in Egypt for the past 20 years or so. We went through like a very, I think, dark period from the mid-50s until like recently. And as exciting as it is, there's always going to be bad stuff happening as well. So you see a lot of Pinterest design, you see a lot of stuff that you kind of look at and you're like, oh, this is horrible. Why is this happening? But there's talk now, and there's events, and there's exhibits, and there's like a million suppliers. Like when I started, there was hardly any suppliers, and I was still going local. Like I always preferred buying locally. It's cheaper. You could customize it. It's always more fitting to the personality that you're working with. So I always preferred local, and I think it's very hard to have the argument now that you have to get everything from abroad. I think that's crazy. So I think like buying local products, pushing one another, pushing ourselves to evolve and become better designers is how we think about the future. And we have amazing stuff now that we didn't have 3 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So like we're not as limited as we used to be, for sure.
Well, you mentioned a few interesting words: value, preservation. I think you mean conservation.
Yeah.
I mean because there's
a difference.
No, but also there are people who use it to mean the same thing. But I think the better term is conservation. Under conservation, there's so many things. Preservation could be one of them. But again, the very act of designing and building, in my opinion, is to create value or a number of values, and then that's what we call significance. the sum total. What is the significance of the pyramids, Sultan Hassan or Marashli Church? There's tangible, intangible values, and so on. And conservation, in that sense, is conserving this as much as possible, but also importantly, conserving. Like I consider the proper design from scratch also an act of conservation, because it conserves a skill set and the knowledge and the research process, and of course the building process at a certain level of excellence and going forward. Not just conserving old buildings or old fabric, but at the end of the day, an axiological exercise, philosophy of value. It's about value.
Yeah.
What is the value, and to whom it is valuable, is what underpins all that we're talking about.
So the local, in a way, is a value in itself.
Of course,
Yeah.
because again, in the understanding that it's this very unique location in the world,
Brought
in
this into
space
being.
and time, which will produce a certain genius or a certain way of thinking, that because it's human, it's not perfect, but together, I mean, so we need so many views, not just one. So the desert is going to produce a brilliant view that cannot be produced by the Amazon forests, and we need them all, don't we?
It's a holistic field. It's a synthesis. The architecture is the mother of all.
Yeah.
The mother of all fields. I think we can open it up for the audience if they have any questions.
بخصوص مسجد بسونا، الفكرة والتكليف جه ازاي، والديزاين الكونسبت بتاعه تم ازاي؟ لانه في ميكس كده مختلف بين مش عارف، بين العمارة اللي قريبة شوية من العراق، يمكن المينوريتس هي طبعا مختلفة تماما، بس يعني فيها ميكس بين الحاجات قريبة الشبه بأكتر من حضارة أو أكتر من ميكس. فأنا يعني عايز أعرف المشروع جه ازاي، والتصميم الكونسبت بتاعه جه ازاي.
هو كده شقين. المشروع جه ازاي؟ في قصة بعيدة شوية، يعني ممكن أقول لك المباشرة إنه المكان ده كان عليه مسجد من يعني أقدم مسجد اتبنى على الأرض دي كان عمره 300 سنة مع بداية القرية. اتهدت النسخة الأولى دي في وقت معين من 80 سنة، في الوقت اللي أنا رحت فيه 2014 كان في نسخة تانية عمرها 80 سنة، وبرضو دي كانت ابتدت تتعرض للتآكل بسبب بيت جنبها اتبنى، فهبطت الأساسات، حصل شروخ. المهم إنه بقى مش آمن إنشائيا، فراحوا لجأوا الأرض دي أو المكان ده عيلة اسمها أبو ستيت، هي عيلة أسامة الأزهري. أسامة الأزهري صديقي من زمان جدا، وهو راجل شايف إنه تاني مفيش وجهة نظر واحدة أو علم واحد الحقيقة ينفع تمشي، ما ينفعش نبقى معماريين وبس أو أطباء وبس أو علماء دين وبس. فهو طول الوقت يعني أنا من خلاله هو حتى كعالم دين اتعرفت على ناس في تخصصات علمية زي الأحياء وزي، لأن كلنا بندور على معنى اللي بتفهم منه الممارسة أو التطبيق بتاعك. عندنا نظرة معينة للعالم يعني. فدي بقى القصة الطويلة، إن هو من زمان هو نفسه يفهم إيه عمارة، فمثلا ما فيش موقع ليه قبل اللحظة بتاعت بصونة إلا هو زارها. فلما جم طلبوا منه إن هو يساعدهم إن هو يعيد بناء المسجد، أول حاجة عشان هو عارف إن أنا ساعتها كنت بدرس حفاظ على المباني التاريخية conservation في إنجلترا، فقال لهم استنوا وقفوا، ما حدش يهد، ممكن يكون اللي اتكسر ده نصلحه بدل ما نبني بداله. فده كان الطلب الأولاني، إنه تعالى قول لنا المبنى ده يترمم ولا يتبني من أول وجديد. طبعا يعني اختصارا في حاجة بتعمل اسمها conservation state، أنت بتشوف إيه مجموعة القيم زي ما اتكلمت اللي ممكن تبقى موجودة في المكان اللي تستاهل مجهود الترميم أو لا. بالعكس أنا التحليل بتاعي كان بيقول إنه لما نبص على تاريخ المباني في القرية قبل المسجد ده كانت في مستوى معين عالي جدا، والمسجد ده ممكن يكون بيؤرخ، أو المبنى بتاع المسجد ده في 80 سنة بيؤرخ للهبوط، اللي هو بدأت تدخل مواد دخيلة متنفذة بطريقة سيئة جدا ما فيهاش أي فهم لطريقة معيشتهم ولا بيئتهم ولا المواد اللي عندهم ولا كده. فبقت لحظة فارقة إن ممكن نرجع تاني كأننا رجعنا نمسح بأستيكة 80 سنة دول ونقول الموضوع كان ممكن يكمل إزاي علشان يعمله. فهو الاجابه الكبيره ان هو في ودي علاقه مهمه، المعماري ما بيعملش لوحده، في باترون، في راعي للمشروع. راعي المشروع ده مش شرط واحد معاه فلوس كتير، اهم حاجه مخه عامل ازاي، لان هو كان ممكن يديهم فلوس يبنوا المسجد وخلاص، لا ده هو جابني من اخر الدنيا علشان لقى ان دي فرصه ان احنا نقول فيها معاني كتيره، من ضمنها فكره العنايه بالناس اللي في الاماكن النائيه. يعني ناس كتير قوي كانت بتلوم عليا لما كنت بدي محاضرات على المسجد ولسه ما خلصش، انت ليه بتعمل كل المجهود ده هناك؟ طب هم مش ناس دول، مش ده دي كانت عاصمه مصر. طب احنا بنهزر. فده القصه الطويله يعني بتاع المشروع نفسه. التصميم لا ملوش علاقه بالطرز، لان انا مش بعتقد في مساله الطرز دي الا لو مثلا هنصمم ديكور لمسرحيه او لفيلم او كده، لان انا مؤمن ان المساله التصميميه لازم نميز فيها ما بين المطلق الثوابت، حاجات ما بتتغيرش، زي فكره ان البيت اللي بيجعل اي مبنى ينفع يكون بيت هو الاحساس بالامان. احشد بقى مجموعه من الحلول اللي تحسسك بالامان في البيت، ماشي باي طريقه، لكن شكل الامان ده ممكن يختلف. انت النهارده مش تحط نار قدام الفيلا بتاعتك، بس هتعمل كده قدام الكهف، لان نوع التهديد مختلف، ونار قدام بيتك دلوقتي معناها تهديد مش امان. فالحلول لازم تختلف، فعشان كده مش بحب ابص على طراز معين واعمل زيه، لانه ما عنديش مش شرط، يعني صعب جدا يكون العوامل اللي بتصنع عمارة سواء حل وظيفي او معنى شكل جمالي معين او كده. يعني اذا كان نفس الاب والام بيخلفوا ولد شكله كده وصفاته كده، بعد سنتين بيخلفوا طفل مختلف تماما، فهنكررها ازاي دي؟ يعني فيها جمود. فانا ما بحبش اعمل كده، فهي مش جايه، هي مشيت. هو في الحقيقه المسجد ده ترجمه ل10 سنين قبلها من الاختلاط مع احمد مصطفى، ده فنان مصري في لندن، كتب كتاب اسمه الخط الكوني. الكتاب ده هو بيتكلم فيه على ما استخلصه من نظريات للجمال وفهم التعبير والتشكيل من خلال الخط المنسوب، نظرية الخط المنسوب. وانا كان حظي ان انا يعني كنت جنبه في ال10 سنين دول بالكامل. نظام النسبة في المكان ده كله مبني على الموضوع ده، والمئذنة دي جاية من شرحه للحرف الألف مثلا، بس في ثلاثي الأبعاد. فمش ببص على التاريخ باعتباره يعني اللي حضرتك بتشاور عليه ده ممكن يبقى شوية يسموه إكلاكتيسيزم، يعني بجيب حتة من هنا وحتة. أنا مش بحب طبعا، ممكن لا من حقك تحس إنه
ديزاين مختلف تماما عن شكل المعادن، حتى في بالانظمه المختلفه بتاعتها وفي العصور المختلفه بتاعتها. فانا كنت مهتم اعرف بس الانسبريشن
ما كانش ليه علاقه تاريخيه من ناحيه معماريه، لكن كان ليه علاقه بالمبدئين اللي بيكونوا حرف الالف عند ابن مقلم. فممكن كده ده عراقي، يعني هو برضه كان عايش في بغداد.
قلت كمان كلمه مهمه قوي، كلمه الترجمه، انه العماره هي بتترجم مش يعني
لما اتكلمت عن الثيسس في انجلترا، واتكلمت عن المساجد في بريطانيا المفروض يبقى شكلها ايه، ممكن تدينا اكتر الحته دي من الثيسس بتاعتك ومن الواقع اللي موجود دلوقتي؟
هو الثيسس العنوان بتاعها كان The Mosque in Britain، وبعدين نقطتين فوق بعض British Heritage question mark. Heritage question mark، عشان هي الرسالة دي كانت في برنامج دراسات عليا بتاع حفاظ على المباني التاريخية. فأنا حبيت أضرب كذا عصفور بحجر، يعني إن أنا شايف إنه عمارة المساجد مثلا في العالم الإسلامي ممكن يعني حتى من الرفاعي، واحنا جايين على قد جمال الرفاعي، بس انا بشوفه برضو بداية المنزلق ده، لانه الرفاعي فيه استشراق غير واعي كتير وعلى جماله وعظمته برضو، بس في انحدار في فهم، لان مفيش عملية اصلية في التوليد، مش بنشتبك على المبادئ عشان نطلع اشكال، بنروح نتعامل مع الاشكال على طول. فده طبعا زي الفوتوكوب، صورة من صورة من صورة، بعد شوية بتبتدي تنهار. فواحدة من الأساليب الجيدة لفهم إزاي ممكن تطور نوع معين من المباني زي المساجد، تايبولوجي يعني، انك تبتدي تشوفه في سياق غير اللي هو اتعود انه يكون فيه. فهو المسجد ما حصلش في مصر، هو حصل في الجزيرة العربية، بس لما جه مصر هنا خد شكل معين او مجموعة اشكال معينة، ولما راح الهند عمل كده، لما وصل الغرب او مكان زي بريطانيا بالذات ما انسجمش. فالشخص البريطاني الغير مسلم اللي ماشي في الشارع شوف مسجد بريطاني، مسجد في بريطانيا، بالنسبه لي كمسلم بمشي في بريطانيا بنزعج قوي من المساجد، بنزعج قوي من المساجد من جوه ومن بره خالص، لانها جايه من عمليه. هو طبعا احنا لازم نعذر الناس اللي عملتها، لانه تاريخ وصول المسلمين في العصر الحديث لبريطانيا اللي هم طلبوا ان هم يعملوا مساجد هم عباره عن ناس من الهند مثلا كانوا موجودين في شرق افريقيا، ايدي امين طردهم خدوهم بسرعه، فبقى في ارتفاع في اعداد المسلمين موجودين هناك، وعنده فكره واهيه عن جده المسجد في الهند كان شكله، فهو حتى مش نسخه جيده من المسجد بتاع قريته اللي هو يعتبر ما شافهاش، يعني هو جيل رابع. هم الانجليز نقلوهم من الهند لشرق افريقيا، وبعدين عاشوا في شرق افريقيا، وبعدين خدوهم على فعمليه كلها ملخبطه ما فيهاش اي فكر، علشان هم مستواهم الاقتصادي والتعليمي وثقتهم الحضاريه في نفسهم كلها ضعيفه. بس خلاص انا بقى بقول في الرساله دي انتهى الفكره دي، ولازم نبتدي نفكر من اول وجديد، علشان مسجديه المسجد او يكون المسجد ده مسجد ناجح جزء منه انه يكون لوك، يعني لو هو في بريطانيا يبقى بريطاني. لان احنا النهارده لو واحد يهودي مصري ماشي جنب السلطان حسن وقالوا له في بلدوزر جاي يهده، هينام على الارض ويوقفه، صح؟ مع ان هو مش بيتعبد في المكان ده. ونفس الحكايه لو قالوا لي الكنيسه المعلقه تحت خطر انا اجري ارمي نفسي عليه. ف انه يكون في قيمه ل مش مجرد السبسكرايبرز للانسانيه اللي هي بقى بيسموها universal significance، يعني قيمه عامه لكل الناس. كلنا مش محتاجين لما نشوف ولد شكله جميل مش هنسأل بقى ده مصري ولا هندي ولا، خلاص جميل، او مامته بتطبطب عليه احنا فرحانين ام بتطبطب على ابنها، دي قيمة عامة يعني. بس فكان ده المؤشر يعني الفكرة العامة اللي عملت ده يعني. ولان طبعا كان في جزء تاني بقى اللي هو البوليتيكال، انا ضد البوليتيكال كوركتنس والكوتا ولا او لازم نصنف مساجد للمسلمين نقول عليها هيريتج عشان يبقى عندنا دايفرستي. لا، لما المسجد ده يبقى مبنى مؤهل ان يكون له قيمه بيمس شغاف قلب كل الناس يتحط تراث، غير كده يبقى هو لسه ما وصلش نحل المشاكل اللي خلته ما يوصلش. مش مفيش مؤامره يعني ولا اضطهاد ولا الكلام ده، او في رايي على الاقل يعني.
I think there was your hand raised at the back.
هلو، هاي رمزي. أنا عايز أسأل سؤال ليك أنت actually يا وليد على I'm interested to know the process that you took with the people in Basuna, because you talked about how it influenced the entire creative process that you went through in order to create this something for them. And I feel like sometimes when you're working in areas that are rural or underserved or in different ways, you run the risk of designing for them but not with them, right? Like it's your own perspective in that place. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering about the process that you went throughout the design, the actual construction and everything. What was the process with the people of the place? Thank you.
Participatory design. I have a very peculiar. عايز بالإنجليزي ولا بالعربي؟ I have a very. I think I see people either 100% for participatory or they don't care. I think we need to have a balanced approach because, as I said, I don't know if you were here yet or not, but there's a difference between what people say they want and what they actually need. And of course, we have to, at all costs, avoid being dictators. But at the same time, we have to realize sometimes that there's something wrong. And you need to be firmer or more patient. It's about not being a dictator becomes about how you're going to get your points across and how well your points have been established to begin with, because you wouldn't want to argue something that is not there. It's just a figment of your imagination, or it's your ego, or whatever. So you have to establish your points, and then you have to get them across in a good, in a non-dictatorial way. Because I believe that an architect does have an educational role. So I'm not going to say, okay, they like, there are so many examples, discussions that I see when they say Musallas Maspiro, and let's do it all in red brick and concrete because this is how the people build. That's not how the people build us, and that's not a well-established point. That's because they have priorities. They have limited budgets, and if you give them money, they're probably going to do Shara Tsin, which is terrible. Okay, in Tagamma. So I think we need to tread very carefully, but this all has to stem from a place of trust. They trusted me because of the person who commissioned me, because for them he's a point of trust. That's one. The second thing, I was not exactly an alien to the Upper Egyptian thing. I was born in the States, but I came when I was 7 and lived 4 months straight, not in Cairo, in Upper Egypt and I continued in the life of my grandfather to go to Upper Egypt all the time. So I was very familiar with it. I'm not an alien to them. So I managed to understand them and get my points across. A third thing is that my process is design and build. So I didn't design and walk away and let it be built. So that trust increased day by day because I was there and I could get reactions firsthand. Like for instance, we had that discussion about wanting to have a very tall minaret. I got books, I showed them the different proportions between the size of the mosque and the minaret, and also how it affects the urban, the fabric of the place, and how this is going to be very odd, in addition to it being expensive, and that the idea of the height, I mean, like if we do the height that I was suggesting, you're going to see it from all across the village, so no need for more. Obviously, not everybody has to be happy then, but you have to have at least a critical mass that believes in that. The second contentious point, very big one that was really where horns really locked, was with the women's area. I wasn't there, and they stopped the workers from building that when they knew it was. But I'm talking about a very small group of elderly men. There were younger men who were for it, and all the women were for it. And then they had to go to the patron, who's part of their family. So he's part of the community, and he's financing it. And he said, if you want to do this, you do not consider my opinion as a religious scholar. I don't know if I can help you. And that ended there. And then, but more importantly than building it, is that when it was finished, the women populated the place more than the men. And so done. So there's a bit of, you can think of this as, okay, they used their financial leverage to do this or that, or the religious authority kind of thing. But everything was based in trust at the beginning, because neither the patron nor I were aliens to the place, one way or the other. Obviously, he's from there, but my father's town is just 40 kilometers south. So.
Hi, I have 2 questions. Number one was following up on the ownership of the locals of that mosque, or the harmony of the place within its context. I'm curious about your, like you said, design and build process. How did you acquire the materials and the craftsmanship that have been used throughout the construction process? Was it like following the local craftsmanship, or did you utilize modern methods in construction? That's number one. Number two is about, again, ownership. And maybe that doesn't directly apply to a mosque, a standalone mosque, but when you mention conservation, how to avoid the risk of gentrification and that sometimes happen in restored places or iconic buildings that sheds some light on informal communities, for instance. Thank you.
We need an hour. So the first question was about the structural system and the building materials and so on, and the workmanship. Okay, that's very funny because there's a saying where they say "Shil tuba, تلاقي تحتها سوهاجي." Like the Sohag people, as also as you know from Dalida's song, they're very sturdy people. So they are always the best construction people, and they're very ambitious. So none of them stay home. You'll find them in Cairo and in Alexandria and in the Gulf and not in their home village. So funny enough, there were no skilled people who live in the place. And in order to get materials as well, because this is a very, very small village as well, it's lesser than 30,000 people. I had to drive 40 kilometers north to Tahta, or Tahta as they call it, where there are building materials, wood, and maybe skilled people and so on. So the building people that were with me were actually from Aswan, because they're people that work with me all the time. And the building is hybrid. So some of the things, like the initial design was all load-bearing building, but then the soil tests proved that the own weight of the building is going to be too heavy for this, and it's going to be counterproductive and less sustainable. So we did a very small skeleton. Like for instance, our roof is not a concrete slab, it's a gridiron of beams, intersecting beams. Is getting technical, but I mean very, very minimal, because in the calculation I used, like the main dome that you see is made of very light brick block, made of sand and what do you call it, lime and air. So it's a mix, really. I don't want to get too technical because I see people yawning. And no, the craftsmanship was from outside of the village, because their best skilled people don't work in the village. It's not feasible for them. They have big dreams. So that's, I think, your question number one. Question number two, gentrification in Basuna or generally? In Basuna didn't go further than it being listed in Lonely Planet, and now it's becoming a destination. But I think the social fabric there is too strong for me to worry about something like this. I mean, for 3 years I've been going there, and there's not a room for me to stay there. I had to stay in Sohag, the city. Okay, so it's a very tight-knit social fabric. You can't really gentrify a place like this. But in other places, yes, of course, gentrification is something that we need to be mindful of, but that's a big subject. It could be discussed in the light of East London more than Basuna. Yes, yeah, especially recently.
Also, like, I briefly worked in Old Cairo in Darb el Labena.
Yep.
In the early process of renovating the street and the whole area. When you talked about the resistance how the locals were integrated in the design process, what methods that can we implement to actually like make them, like, you see, how to, not what you are saying, it's how you're saying it. We've met a lot of resistance. At some point I had to go into people's apartment. I had to like document everything and like take photographs of their very own private space.
Right.
And for me that was kind of, I felt that I'm violating them. So how do we approach this without while being culturally and socially sensitive, maybe?
Everything needs to be with permission, right?
Obviously, we took their consent, but it wasn't really kind of optional. Like they had like a crew of engineers, and we had licenses
I think
and
you
all
need to
that.
look at the experiment or like the experience of someone like Mail Ibrosh.
Yeah. Obviously,
Okay.
yeah.
I walked with her in Al Hattaba. She's the mayor. Okay. So she's there amongst the people. So they trust her. So that she doesn't even have to ask. She knows everything by heart because she's amongst the people.
It's a question of the local again.
Yeah. So she's one of them.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think that's a very brilliant example.
Yeah, I've seen her in her element in Imam al-Shafi'i, and yeah, she's amazing. Yeah.
It's just that, the local resonates well with how humble you kind of are as a designer or as an architect. You know how to blend in the background to serve the people around you, and Maïla Broshi kind of knows how to do that.
The people and the nature and the cult and the architecture around you and everything. Yeah.
Human nature and design.
Human nature.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions? We have one question.
Peace and blessings, everyone, and good to see you, Waleed. And it's a pleasant surprise to see this wonderful event happening. My question was kind of going off of what this kind lady was sharing earlier in terms of what's the role of local production processes, and how can people in other sectors, other fields, whether it's government or private actors, help encourage production processes that allow for cost-accessible production? Earlier someone mentioned the design crisis. If you ask a regular Egyptian, he'll say, well, maybe we just can't afford to design things. So I guess what's the role of other sectors? How can we encourage local production processes that can support construction and design to make sort of a revival in architecture accessible to the masses? Thank you.
No, I have a few people in the room that I can throw that question to.
That's a big question, yeah.
But I think a very short answer is to make it relevant as much as possible. You have to be smart. If you're principled, I think you need to outsmart the all these mediocre and deceptive people because it's not right, and it never happened in history that something valuable was brought back into relevance just out of sentimental attachment, because a few people like it, like let's say pottery or a certain type of weaving. If it's not economic, if it's not, there's so many facets to something being relevant. And so if somebody who's producing these materials or working with these techniques, they need to really actually study business like he did. So to bring it back, and when I was saying someone in the room, I'm talking about Silva here from Nagada, who's like with the fabric. She's working with the Nagada fabric, Egyptian, thousands of years ago. People are still in the same mode of production. And she's, along with her, the late Michel, and also his wife, both pottery and textile or fabric. Textile, wrong. Fabric, right? She utilized the material in ways. Look at the beautiful ensemble she's wearing, and a few people here also I can identify who are wearing Nagada, and lo and behold, that flew all the way to London through the lady sitting next to her, and it featured in 3 blockbusters by Warner Brothers. Relevance. So we have to work on the relevance, because if it's not relevant, as in it's not affordable, it needs to answer to other challenges of our time. If that doesn't happen, it's going to die. And so many things died through the history of people. And if you want to keep it alive, you need to think, where is the relevance?
It's again that question of values, because the sum of the values is the significance. So is it significant or not? Is it? Yeah.
Also, I think that we all have a job to do to support local industry, and there's so many amazing brands now that just by supporting them, you're helping them. It's a domino effect. You know, I mean, Adat al-Khawaja is a real thing in this country. And so it's important to like see how many options we have locally and support them.
Yeah, well, there's one question at the back.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I have missed a lot, but in one of my previous incarnations, I was an engineer, and in a later incarnation, I lived in Iran. And one question that's striking me here in Egypt now is that why is it becoming so difficult to build beautiful, as opposed to what I have seen in a place like Iran, for example? Thank you.
Yeah, it really hurts. Ouch. No, it's a very valid question. I'm afraid that the answer is very simple. It's about worldview. I mean, the people don't know what they want to be, so the easiest thing is to copy. And because of other factors, when we're copying, we don't have the power even to copy in up to scratch. Like, it's wrong to copy to begin with, in my opinion. Like, you don't want to be Geneva going on in the hearts and minds of people. And I'm afraid we have a lot of emptiness now because we've been convinced through, sometimes by force and sometimes through laziness. Force, I mean colonialism. But then, I mean, it's been a while now, so there's laziness. So I'm not saying that colonialism went away, by the way. It's still there. We can feel it. You just come from Iran and the people can feel the brunt of it right now, and it's at our doorsteps. However, we can't just blame that anymore. But we haven't found ourselves yet, although I think the answers are very clear because we have a long history of clear answers.
I think it's a very confusing thing, and it doesn't make sense with all our history and all our success that we're looking abroad and we don't have the taste that we used to. And I think that education at home and at school is essential. Like I was talking earlier about my dad since I was a kid, museums, walks, architecture, classical music, symphony. It's like, as geeky as that sounds, you have to be educated. And I'm sure like Waleed and his wife do the same thing with their kids, where they expose their kids constantly to what is beauty, to your ears, to your eyes, to your palate.
It's a value, and it's a value that you need to instill in someone else.
Yeah.
No.
And it's not being instilled.
I'm not sure I want to say what I want to say, but it's just a comment for both of you. I would like to comment about the Louvre and the pyramids at the Louvre. How would you define this? What is your feeling towards this echo or this dialogue between the pyramids, then the Louvre, then the pyramids again? I mean, the way it was done. Just if you have a comment.
No, mine's very subjective.
Yeah, say your subjective opinion.
But mine is just very subjective.
Subjective too.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan. I was never a big fan of it. I love the Louvre, and I don't feel it added anything. And just like I was talking before about being quiet, I think they could have done something in a much more elegant, subtle way to gain access from that point. But they chose something that's a bit more shocking and a bit more eye-catching. And
don't you think that contrast does something?
yeah, but I think the Louvre itself is so beautiful. So that in itself is something that's beautiful. You don't have to contrast something that gorgeous.
I'm afraid we're gonna differ on this.
We're gonna
one.
differ. Okay.
Differ on many points. I don't find it beautiful, not in its manifestation and not
itself.
in what it represents. I have a big problem with France. Okay. But I mean, regardless of that, because if you accept, like we are accepting to evaluate this or voice an opinion on this, I'm going to start from a point of departure where I will consider it. It is valuable, regardless of, and it's there, and it's been there, and it's important for this country and this place and everything. And there are two approaches. I sometimes agree with this approach, but in this particular instance, I think IMP did a great job because everything, the new program was added below, and you had to announce that that's there.
Yeah.
But you either do it in a way that is a continuation of what is there, but I mean 17th century, doing it in the 20th century, it's not right. Even in conservation, you have to do things in a discernible manner. Like when you add another layer, it has to be understood that this happened in this time, not in the old time.
Yeah.
That's a very important principle in conservation.
I agree with that. I just don't agree with what's sticking out.
He did it. I mean, he did it in the least impactful way, in my opinion, because his choice of material, and then most of what is underneath is Egyptian, anyways. We want it back. So pyramid, and of course, Mitterrand had a very strong role in because everybody was against it. But again, Paris has a long history of rejecting things and then being defined by them, like the Eiffel
Pompidou
Tower.
itself.
The Eiffel Tower, the Pompidou, and the pyramid as well. These are three places that if somebody stands next to them and takes a picture, we know that it's in Paris. But they were all faced with incredible, and but I mean, the importance of this question, thank you for it, is that balance, because it also applies to Cairo. Are we in a museum or are we a living city? But living onwards and evolving shouldn't also be a self-inflicted amnesia. There is a balance to it, very delicate. That's my problem with what's happening, is that it's not dealt with in a delicate manner. It's like tomorrow. So sometimes it's right, many times it's wrong. I mean, it's one Cairo, you shouldn't do that. That's my opinion. But I think it's a successful example of this balance, this delicate balance between being a historical city that has a future as well.
And you said that when we feel that we are in harmony with a place, it means the proportions are perfect, and that it is a success. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we walk there, we do feel good, no matter what the mind is saying.
I think if there are no more questions, okay.